We are constantly sold this idea, like literally everywhere we look, that mindfulness, meditation, and quieting the ego are, well, they're the ultimate paths to bliss.
Oh, absolutely. It's basically the modern promise, right?
Right. You silence the noise in your head, you let go of your worldly attachments, and boom, you just arrive at this absolute unshakable peace.
Yeah, that's the story we all hear.
But I want you to imagine something for a second. What happens when that actually works? And I mean, what if it works entirely too well?
That is the big question.
Yeah, like what if reaching that state of pure awareness doesn't actually make you feel blissful at all, but instead makes you feel like an empty robot?
It is a paradox that completely upends our standard cultural narrative, about meditation and spiritual awakening.
Really does.
We just naturally assume that the absence of a busy, neurotic ego automatically leaves behind this void that's filled with joy. But the reality is, it's far more complex and, frankly, sometimes deeply unsettling for the people who actually experience it.
And that unsettling reality is the core mission of our deep dive today. We're looking at a really fascinating stack of sources here.
Yeah, it's a great mix of materials.
Right, we've got cognitive science papers, anecdotal surveys from advanced meditators, and clinical psychology essays. And they detail exactly what happens when the sense of self just suddenly fades.
Which some researchers call persistent non-symbolic experience, or PNSE.
Okay, yes, PNSE,
Uh,
or awakening or entering a state of no self. And we're going to map out the mechanics of why that profound silence doesn't automatically equal happiness,
exactly.
and how the physical body, not the mind, might actually be the secret key to keeping the flavor of life.
Because we spend an enormous amount of time, in modern psychology and spirituality, trying to fix our minds by using our minds.
Always analyzing, right?
Right, we analyze our thoughts, we try to outthink our anxiety, but we completely ignore the physical hardware that actually processes our experience of being alive.
Yeah.
And when the software of the ego shuts down, well, relying solely on the mind becomes a trap.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the analogy that just kept coming to my mind as I was reading through these surveys was about mountain climbing.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, it's like you spend years, maybe even decades, climbing this massive, treacherous mountain to reach the summit of absolute peace.
Right.
And you finally get to the top, the view is perfectly clear, the weather is totally still. But the air is so thin up there that your taste buds just stop working.
Ah, yeah, the altitude sickness.
Exactly. You sit down to eat your absolute favorite meal to celebrate, and it tastes like cardboard. You achieve the goal, the silence is real, but the very tools you use to enjoy the journey have just, well, they've shut down.
The mountain summit is a really helpful visual, especially when we look at the clinical symptoms detailed in these sources.
Yeah, the symptoms are pretty wild.
They are. When a person experiences a sudden, dramatic reduction in their sense of self, it triggers this whole cascade of neurological and psychological changes.
Like what specifically?
Well, we are talking about a sudden drop in thoughts and mental imagery, a severe reduction in desires and interests, but the most jarring symptom is an inability to recall or recreate previous emotional states.
Okay, wait. I want to pause on that term you used earlier, persistent non-symbolic experience, or PNSE,
Sure.
because we throw around words like no self, but what does non-symbolic actually mean in this context?
So think about how you normally interact with the world. You don't just experience reality, right? You experience your brain's symbols of reality.
Okay, so like labels.
Exactly. You see a tree, and immediately your brain generates the word tree, maybe a memory of climbing one as a kid,
Yeah.
or a judgment about, whether it needs pruning.
Right, the internal monologue.
Yeah, those are symbols, internal language, concepts, the constant narrator in your head.
Yeah.
When someone enters PNSE, that symbolic layer drops away. You just perceive the raw sensory data of the tree. There's literally no narrator interpreting it for you.
Wow. And from the outside, you look at a person in that state and they seem like a Zen master.
Totally unbothered.
Yeah, they are incredibly peaceful, totally unbothered by traffic or a stressful email. But the sources note that their internal subjective experience can actually be terrifying.
Which is the part nobody talks about.
Right. People describe it using phrases like, life has become tasteless, or there's a hollow space inside, or simply, I feel like a robot.
And to understand why it feels so hollow, we really have to distinguish between two completely different psychological experiences of nothing.
Okay, let's hear them.
So when you tell a friend, I feel nothing, they usually assume you are talking about type A, which is existential emptiness.
That heavy dread we all feel sometimes, like that feeling of Something should be here, but it isn't.
Right, the classic existential crisis.
Like, I need to feel fulfilled, I want my passion back, my life lacks meaning.
But here is the critical catch with type A existential emptiness. It proves that a self is still very much intact.
Wait, really? How does feeling empty prove you have a self?
Because the very fact that you feel a lack, that you are actively mourning the absence of meaning, means there is still an I that wants something.
Oh, I see.
It is a self in distress, sure, but the structural ego is still fully operational.
Okay, so then type B is true nothingness. This is where the actual reference point, that center of gravity in your brain that says this is for me, has weakened or vanished entirely.
Precisely. In true nothingness, the sensation of lack itself has weakened.
So you don't even miss it.
Right. The thoughts, the job, the relationships, the food, they are all still physically there in reality. But that gravitational center that pulls those things inward and labels them as mine or important to my story, it's completely faint.
Okay, I was trying to conceptualize this, and I thought about it like opening your refrigerator.
Okay, let's hear the fridge analogy.
So existential emptiness is when you open the fridge, you see there is no chocolate cake, and you are devastated.
Yeah.
You really wanted that cake. You are suffering because of the lack of cake.
Standard human experience? Yeah.
Right. But true nothingness is opening the fridge, seeing there is no cake, and realizing the very concept of wanting cake has been completely deleted from your brain's hard drive.
Yes.
It's just an empty shelf. No heartbreak, no craving.
The suffering of wanting is eradicated. The structural desire is just gone.
But see, this is where I start to get really confused by the research.
How so?
If the suffering of wanting is totally gone, if you never feel the sting of missing out on the cake, why on earth does the person feel nihilistic? Shouldn't they feel totally free and liberated?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the hollow feeling doesn't come from emotions disappearing entirely. It comes from the fact that emotions stop persisting.
Ah, emotional ghosting.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. People just assume that losing your sense of self means you turn into a stone statue, literally incapable of feeling joy or sadness or anger.
But that's not what happens.
No, the neurological data suggests otherwise. The emotions still happen. You can feel joy when a dog runs up to you. You can feel discomfort if you stub your toe. But they only last for the initial moment they are triggered. There is absolutely no continuation.
They just evaporate into thin air.
Exactly. Because the sense of self is so weak, there is no internal narrator to keep the emotion alive. The person finds it nearly impossible to mentally recreate that emotion or sustain it, or even imagine what it felt like 5 minutes later.
The documentation breaks down what it calls the flavor of life, and it shows how heavily our enjoyment of life relies on emotional continuity.
Yeah, that cycle is so important.
It outlines this 4-step cycle. Step 1, I had fun yesterday. Step 3, I wonder what it'll be like next time. And step 4, I'm really looking forward to it.
And that entire architecture is built on memory, anticipation, and desire. Dopamine, for instance, is heavily tied to anticipating a future reward.
Right, the looking forward part.
Yes, that continuity is the glue that holds our personal narrative together. It is what makes life feel rich and textured.
So if you remove the glue, if an emotion arises, peaks for a millisecond, and then just vanishes without leaving any trace of memory or anticipation, that entire cycle breaks down.
It completely collapses.
So life isn't painful because there's no lingering anxiety about tomorrow, but it completely loses its flavor. It's just a series of disconnected, fleeting milliseconds.
Which brings us to the variable of speed, which is critical to understanding why people react so differently.
Oh, right.
If losing this emotional persistence is so jarring, why do some longtime meditators seem completely fine with it, while others just fall into an existential panic?
Well, it comes down to the mind-body disconnect, right? And whether this happens to you gradually over a decade or just suddenly on a random Tuesday afternoon.
Exactly. The author of the source material shares their own personal background to highlight this. Their loss of self didn't happen overnight.
No, it was a long process.
Right. It happened gradually over thousands of hours. Interestingly, it was initially triggered accidentally by driving.
Which totally reminds me of highway hypnosis.
Yeah.
You know, that state where you are highly alert to the road, your reflexes are sharp, but your internal monologue just completely powers down and you forget the last 10 miles.
Yes, that exact feeling. And they found that state comfortable, spent thousands of hours in it, and eventually moved into formal Zen-like postural awareness.
So they eased into it.
Right. Because it was a slow fade, their nervous system had time to adapt to the absence of an ego. The brain slowly rewired its reward systems.
But contrast that with someone who has a sudden ego death, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe they go to an intense 10-day meditation retreat or
Mm.
engage in rigorous self-inquiry practices, and they wake up one morning and the self is just completely gone.
When it happens suddenly, the previous version of the self is still right there in the rearview mirror as a really jarring reference point.
It's a culture shock in your own head.
Yeah. The brain's pattern recognition software is essentially screaming, something that was literally here yesterday has suddenly disappeared.
I want to dig into the biology of this bit, because the central hypothesis in these papers is that cognitive stillness, a quiet mind, and bodily activation are not the same thing.
No, they're not.
They actually operate on completely independent dials.
That's a great way to put it. The mind can become completely, profoundly quiet before the body gets activated.
Which isn't what we expect.
Not at all.
Mm.
We tend to assume that if the mind is silent, the body will naturally flood with vitality and pleasure. But the disappearance of self-referential thought in the brain's default mode network does not automatically trigger vivid sensory experience in the rest of the nervous system.
So what does this all mean? Is this like updating your smartphone's operating system?
A smartphone analogy, I like it.
Let's say you install the newest, sleekest software. It runs flawlessly, zero lag, perfectly silent. But then you realize the screen brightness is turned all the way down to 1%, the speaker volume is muted, and the haptic feedback is completely broken.
Oh, that's perfect.
The software, the mind is perfect and quiet, but the physical hardware, the body, feels completely dead to the world.
Yes, you have a very clear mind, very little self-referential thought, weak desire, but completely insufficient bodily activation.
And that's where the hollow feeling comes from.
Exactly. Because the hardware feels unpowered, the subjective interpretation of that state by whatever remains of your consciousness is, well, hollow, empty, tasteless.
But if the software, the ego, is completely quiet and the system feels unpowered, how do we plug it back in? Because my instinct, and I think most people's instinct, would be to go back into the software.
To try and think your way out of it.
Right. To sit there and try to think your way back into having a personality.
The source material strongly advises against that approach. You cannot fix the mind with the mind once the illusion of the self has been broken.
It's too late for that.
Yeah, trying to forcibly reconstruct an ego through thought is exhausting and usually impossible. Instead, you turn to the physical hardware. This is the mechanism of bottom-up processing.
I have to admit, I am struggling to see how simply moving my body cures an existential crisis. Are you saying that adjusting my posture is going to magically make me stop feeling like a hollow robot? Because that sounds wildly reductive.
I know, it sounds reductive until you look at how the nervous system actually communicates. Usually we operate top-down, right? Your brain has a stressful thought, which sends signals down the vagus nerve to elevate your heart rate and tense your muscles.
Okay, sure.
Bottom-up processing reverses that flow. By intensely altering the physical state of your body, you force raw, undeniable sensory data up into the brainstem.
Bypassing the mind entirely.
Exactly. You are bypassing the cognitive layer entirely and forcing the brain to register physical aliveness.
So even when the ego fades into nothing, the physical body is still sitting right there, pumping blood and breathing.
Right. And by feeding the brain intense, clear physical signals, you create clarity, comfort, and physical vitality. You generate a feeling of aliveness that doesn't require a neurotic ego to sustain it.
The sources mention some very specific physical methods for doing this. Things like postural adjustment, whole body tension, somatic integration, paying acute attention to bodily sensations.
And this specifically addresses one of the biggest myths in the wellness space. The myth of spontaneous bliss.
Oh, the idea that if you just stop thinking, you will magically float on a cloud of ecstasy.
Right. Intense experiences of bliss or ecstasy do not arise simply from the absence of thought. They're intimately connected to intense bodily sensation.
They're two different things.
Yes. The disappearance of self-reference and the emergence of bodily vitality are two completely separate processes. You have to actively cultivate the latter.
The text even mentions some pretty intense body-based practices like Japan's Shirin and the AEO, or Advanced Energy Orgasm Method.
Yes, it does.
And just to be clear for anyone listening, from what I read, Shirin involves extreme muscular tension and postural holding to force a flood of sensory feedback to the brain, while AEO focuses on generating massive bodily and head and neck sensations without conventional stimulation.
We need to be very careful here, though, to frame these exactly as the source material does.
The point.
These practices are absolutely not an established medical treatment for a sudden loss of self or emotional flattening. There is no established scientific evidence in the literature that they can magically repair neural networks or restore your previous psychological configuration.
Right, they're mentioned purely as an exploratory direction, a way to experiment with generating intense bodily sensation, flooding the hardware with extreme input, just to see how it changes the felt quality of your baseline brain state.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of neuroplasticity, it makes a lot of sense. The nervous system is plastic. The brain's neural networks change based on the somatic experiences you feed them.
So it adapts.
Yes. If you flood the system with intense physical sensation, the brain has to rewire to process that input.
Meaning, you haven't given yourself permanent brain damage by meditating too hard. You've just pruned away certain networks,
Yeah.
and now you need to stimulate different ones.
But on the flip side, you also can't just snap your fingers and instantly return to exactly the person you were before the shift.
You can't just undo it.
Right. Long-term patterns of attention and cognition stabilize through repetition. The reality is somewhere in the middle. It isn't completely irreversible brain damage, but you
Mhm.
also can't just rewind the clock effortlessly either.
So let's bring this down to reality for a second. Assume you aren't trying to rewind the clock. You have accepted this state.
Okay.
What does a normal Tuesday actually look like for someone living this way? Like, if I don't have an ego pushing me to get a promotion, do I just sit on the couch staring at the wall forever? How do you function at work or in a relationship without that driving force of, I want this?
It requires an entirely new motivational paradigm. Ordinary life for most of us is driven by the thought, I want to do this, therefore I do it.
Right. I want to be respected, so I will work late. Or I want comfort, so I will eat this entire pizza.
Exactly. But when that central I want fades away, life doesn't just stop. The body still has biological needs, the environment still demands interaction.
So what replaces it?
The internal dialogue shifts from, I want to do this, to simply, this needs to be done, so I do it. Or even more simply, this is what naturally happens next.
Yeah, and I mean, here's where it gets really interesting to me. It feels like the difference between driving a manual transmission car and an automatic.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to frame it.
Right. Like before, when you had a strong ego, you had to consciously shift every single gear.
Yeah.
You had this heavy, exhausting inner monologue. I need to push the clutch. I need to shift into third gear so I can go faster. I am driving this car so I can be happy when I reach my destination.
And it takes an immense amount of cognitive energy to sustain that narrative.
It's exhausting. But in this new state, the car just responds directly to the road. The hill gets steeper. The car downshifts on its own.
Yes.
The work project has a deadline. The hands type on the keyboard. The body gets hungry. The feet walk to the kitchen. The action happens without the heavy narrative overlay of the driver agonizing over every single decision.
And that is a profound relief for some people. But for others, especially those in the middle of a sudden, terrifying shift where they feel completely alienated from their own lives, it is deeply unsettling.
Which makes sense.
It does. And the source provides some incredibly grounded advice for anyone experiencing sudden distress from a loss of self.
Which was actually surprising to me. The very first piece of advice is stop meditating.
Yes. Do not immediately double down on intense meditation or self-inquiry. When the nervous system is shocked by the sudden disappearance of its primary operating system, adding more esoteric practice is the absolute opposite of what it needs.
The first step is radically ordinary. Just live normally.
Exactly.
Eat your meals, move your body, talk to a friend even if it feels a bit hollow, go to work, listen to music. Step outside and feel the wind. Just let your nervous system receive ordinary, grounding, sensory stimulation from the physical world.
The nervous system is still trying to adapt. You have to give it time to process ordinary input without forcing it.
And if it doesn't get better?
If the distress continues after a substantial period, the goal shouldn't necessarily be, how do I magically restore my old self?
It shifts to, how can I increase sensory richness?
Yes.
How can I create a vivid, embodied state of being alive right here in the physical hardware, even if the software of the ego is quiet?
It is a profound reframing of what it means to be alive. We are so conditioned to believe that our aliveness is generated by our thoughts, our worries, our ambitions, our constant inner storytelling.
So what does this all mean for someone listening to this deep dive who hasn't experienced an ego death, but just wants to understand how their own mind works? We normally live by this incredibly complex top-down cycle, right?
They do.
We start with a sense of self, which generates a desire, which creates an emotion, which leads to an action, which finally results in a fleeting moment of satisfaction.
But when that sense of self fades, You are forced to rely on a much simpler, more direct bottom-up pathway.
bypassing the ego entirely.
Right. It starts with the physical body, which registers a sensation, which directly influences the brain state, which naturally results in an action.
It completely strips away all the middle management in your brain.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this realization is that it removes the judgment.
Absolutely.
A sudden loss of self-reference doesn't mean you are a fully enlightened, superior being.
Huh.
And it also doesn't mean you are fundamentally broken or brain damaged. It just means the old operating system is quiet and the physical hardware needs to be turned up.
You don't have to build a stronger ego to feel alive. You can simply allow the necessary actions to arise naturally by directly regulating your physical interaction with the world.
So if you find yourself at the summit of that mountain we talked about at the beginning, surrounded by absolute stillness, and the air is so thin you can't taste the food, the answer isn't to sit there and try to think your way into enjoying the meal.
No, it's not.
The answer is to start taking deep breaths, move your muscles, feel the cold rock under your hands, and let your physical senses ground you back into the reality of the mountain. You let the body become the new foundation.
Beautifully said.
I want to leave you with a challenge to mull over as you go about your day tomorrow. Take a look at your own actions, the way you move through your routine, the way you react to your coworkers, the way you make decisions. How much of what you feel, the stress, the intense desire, the flavor of the moment, is actually just you telling an exhaustive story about yourself in your head? And what might happen to your day if you just drop the story, turn off the heavy machinery of the ego, and let your physical senses tell you what naturally needs to happen next?